Work Wellness Institute is transforming research into workplace performance and health. As an organization, we function throughout the complete cycle of turning research into practice, mobilizing knowledge as a research institute, community partner, funder, and educational provider. Our mission of creating safe, healthy, and inclusive workplaces for all is our driving motivation. Learning is a lifelong journey to adapt to the forever changing needs of the workplace. Whether you are a leader, a professional, an academic, or a student, we provide high-quality resources that are evidence-based, topical, and relevant to all industries. Choose the Work Wellness Institute as your learning journey partner and become a member to gain full access to our diverse knowledge mobilization programming, including lectures on demand, e-curriculum, 3 distinct certification opportunities, and more. Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we can support transforming research into performance and health for your workplace.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join today's webinar on when does diversity training produce unintended outcomes in organizations. We're so happy that all of you were able to join us today. My name is Elizabeth White, and I am the team lead of learning and development with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'm here today to help host and moderate today's webinar. I do want to start off by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. This webinar is made possible through the support of our funders, partners, as well as membership to the Work Wellness Institute. And we always want to thank our advisory committees and speakers who contribute to this webinar series. Welcome Guler, who we're so excited to have with us. Guler initiated her professional journey in a multinational consumer products company, navigating through roles in supply chain, sales, and marketing. Concurrently pursuing an MBA, she refined her expertise in leadership and organizational capabilities. Advancing in her career, Guler encountered challenges within large corporations, notably in diversity management and leadership skills. Noting the significant impact of interpersonal skills on employee and organizational performance, she shifted her focus towards cultivating inclusive workplaces, leading her into a consulting career. Embracing the synergy of practical experience and academic knowledge, Guler embarked on a PhD in human resources management at York University. Equipped with skills in research and consultancy, she specializes in management, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or short form DEI. Guler has accumulated over 1,250 hours in facilitating and training, coupled with 1,500 hours in coaching for individuals and groups. Driven by a passion for fostering positive organizational change, she integrates academic insights with practical acumen to contribute to the progress of management and DEI practices. We're so excited to have you here today, and thank you so much for being here, and I'll pass things over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to you. I'm truly delighted to see so many of you joining us today. Your presence here is greatly appreciated, and we are excited to start the exploration into when does diversity training produce unintended outcomes in organizations. Thank you for taking time to be with us. Let's make this a webinar a valuable, engaging experience together. I would like to add a few details about my journey in DEI. My passion for DEI work stems from my personal experiences across 3 continents, 4 countries, and 5 cities around the world. So the incredible people I have met from diverse backgrounds have consistently made me feel welcomed and included wherever I go. So this was the sense of belonging that fuels my commitment to giving back through my research. So let me outline the flow for our discussion today. So I will provide a brief background on the topic and discuss the identified gap in the literature. And I will clarify the aim of our study and explain why it is so essential. Then I will delve into the methodology we applied, and I will present our results and discuss the implications and maybe future potential research directions. And towards the end, we will open the floor for your questions and comments. Your active participation is highly encouraged. Feel free to share your thoughts, comments, any questions, and your inputs are so valuable for us. Additionally, we have a couple of pool questions prepared, nothing too challenging, just a fun way of engaging and interacting with the content. Before I dive into the discussion, I want to thank my collaborators, Ayesha, Professor Duygu, and Professor Jana. Their contributions have an invaluable to this project. And Ayesha may be joining us on screen during our discussion session. So let's begin with the introduction. Okay, so there's a growing attention to diversity training in organizations due to social developments and social movements, especially following the Black Lives Matter protest of 2020. Many organizations have been committed to accelerating their diversity and inclusion efforts. Several high-profile multinational companies such as Nike, Starbucks have allocated a day for diversity training for all headquarters, including their branches and retails, and made the anti-bias training mandatory and even linked to the executive pay to the achievement of diversity efforts. But despite of the wealth of diversity training for developing minorities experiences in workplaces, such as increased job satisfaction, organizational commitment, actually the extent research on diversity training doesn't always produce positive outcomes as we expected. Actually, they produce a mix of intended and unintended outcomes. And an example of unintended outcomes would be decreased learning and increased backlash discrimination, feelings of exclusion, biased attitudes, and stereotypes towards minorities. And hence, the organizations are still suffering from discrimination and inequalities. So, when it comes to the gap in the literature, it is evident that existing reviews inadequately present unintended outcomes of diversity training and provide an incomplete picture on what are the unintended outcomes of diversity training, what factors distinguish the intended versus unintended outcomes, and what are the boundary conditions for the unintended outcomes. And so that's why our aim is to provide an integrative model for the moderators and also advance our knowledge in diversity training by exploring the moderators that work as a boundary conditions for unintended outcomes. Most importantly, this systematic review provides an integrative model for moderators that explain unintended consequences of diversity training. So when it comes to the method section, so we adopted a systematic review approach to review the extant literature on diversity training outcomes. I'm sorry. To build a comprehensive database, we used APA PsycInfo, EBSCOhost, Business Source, Complete Procast, Web of Science, Core Collection. I'm sorry. And then we use search terms, diversity training, unintended, negative outcomes, consequences, effectiveness, evaluation, organization, and workplace. And then we realized that these research terms, it's not enough. So we again redoing our research, and this is why this project is in progress, and the result may be subjected to change. What we have found is like what we have found, but we may come up with some additional moderators. So when we look at the inclusion criteria, we take into account published in peer-reviewed journals after 2001, and the written language, it's only English, and conducted in organizational content. Maybe these are too much for you, but just as a brief summary, we did identification, screening, eligibility, and inclusion phase in our method section. And at the beginning, we had 2,882 articles, and then the number, after the screening process, the number went down, and then we removed the duplicates, and we look at the eligible articles based on the organizational context, because some of the articles, it was related with educational context, so which we are not interested in. So we came up 20 articles, and then we add 3 more because we use Google Scholar with the same research terms, and then we end up with 23 articles. So you will be seeing a review of 23 articles. So we found mixed outcomes of diversity trainings based on the selected articles. And when we look at the definition of diversity training, we found out that a unique set of instructional programs aim at enabling positive intergroup interactions, eliminating bias, prejudice, and discrimination, supporting skills and knowledge development, enhancing motivation to interact with other diverse groups, and creating inclusive environment for everyone. So each and every article has a different diversity training definitions, but we come up with this definitions because this is the most inclusive definitions which we have gathered among the articles. When we look at the types of interventions, means type of trainings in these articles, it can be categorized in 4 categories. It can be mostly bias and prejudice reduction, implicit bias training and bias literacy, cultural competence, and racial awareness. And when we look at the focus of these trainings, it was focused to culture, gender, age, disability, and diversity in general. And when we see the results, there are intended outcomes such as positive change in cognitive, attitudinal, and behavioral outcomes, and increase in organizational performance. But we also realize that there is also negative consequences, which is no change in negative consequences mean unintended consequences, because no change, it is not necessarily, it needs to be a negative change. No change means, unintended consequence. So no change in cognitive, attitudinal, and behavioral outcomes, and we saw the negative effects and impacts as well. So yeah, this is our so this is our first full questions. So what are the unintended outcomes of diversity trainings?
And we do have it set up that you can click any and all that you think applies. So feel free to begin answering. And I see them coming in, so I'll just allow it to run for a little longer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just note when we share, it will probably come in percentages, but you'll see, like I said, I have it set up that you can check as many as you apply. So the pie will equal more than 100%. Still see things coming in, so I don't want to cut anybody off. Okay, I'll give everyone 5 more seconds and then we'll end and share the results.
Yeah, perception of merit violation. Yes, that is true. Feeling of tokenism, backlash to minorities, declined efficacy in confronting prejudiced behaviors, and little to no long-term changes in attitudes and behaviors. This is the most clicked ones. Yes, I agree. It applies to all response. All definitions are true here. But I can see your pain. You don't see the long-term impact, long-term changes in attitudes and behaviors. Actually, these are the most cited consequences of unintended outcomes. It stays only 2 days or 1 week, but when it comes to after 1 year, we didn't see any impact on it. Yeah, great, thank you. So actually, you already responded. When we look at the negative change, yeah, and also we can add the greater social identity threat, lower sense of belonging and trust, inadvertent othering. It doesn't translate into affirmative action. Yeah, we can also add these negative changes, and obviously we don't see any change behaviors towards minority and long-term changes in attitudes and behaviors. These are all our unintended outcomes. And then what we did with these results. So here is the conceptual models that demonstrates the model of our moderators. So we have two main categories. The one is training context, the other one is organizational context. So we will first examine the training context or training design. In training design, we see training characteristic, training context, focused, training focused, training method, and trainer characteristic, how it applies to unintended outcomes. And also, as an organizational context, we have found that there is a impact on focus on long-term attitudinal support, culture of inclusion, lack of empowerment, diverse top management, embedding diversity training into practice, and diversity beliefs are belongs to the organizational context. Now we will be going each one of them. So when it comes to the trainee characteristic, training, so various training context variables were found to have strong effects on the learning outcomes of diversity training. Bezrukova and colleagues found that mandatory diversity training was much more effective than the voluntary training, first of all. So given that the negative reactions may lead to negative outcomes for diversity training, it can be a dilemma to decide on mandatory versus voluntary diversity trainings. So so when it comes to the mandatory versus voluntary training, it really changes the motivation of the trainees, and also it may also impact the trainee empathy, trainee motivation, participant status role, minority status, and ethnic diversity, high versus low prejudice participants, and cross-race friendship can be included the training characteristics as well. So when it comes to let me see here. When it comes to training. So actually, when it comes to training context, so it would, I'm sorry, it would be vice versa. When it comes to training contents, it would be mandatory, voluntary training, and training in educational settings, and integral approach to other diversity and inclusion initiatives. But when we look at the trainee characteristic, actually, if the trainees high in empathy are more internally motivated to respond without prejudice, since empathy facilitates the understanding other emotions and experiences. And consequently, the participants of diversity training develop positive attitudes towards minorities, such as race and sexual orientation, and extend supportive behaviors towards minorities as well. Research also suggests that participant status roles as an employee versus managers determine the effects of diversity training on attitudinal outcomes. For example, participants in employee role change their attitudes more positively than participants in manager role, since managers have greater control or greater power over other employees. So this is depending on, this may be depending on the participant status role as well. And when it comes to high prejudice and low prejudice participants, what the authors suggested that high prejudice trainees exhibit a greater change in knowledge and a decrease in prejudice behavior compared to low prejudice trainees. Actually, this is somehow expectable, because when you have high in prejudice, you may expect that your discrimination or your prejudice attitudes will be much more lower than compared to low prejudice people. And when it comes to cross-race friendship, if you have a cross-race friendship, what they, Regin and Erhard found that when you have a cross-race friendship, the trainees are much more available to the training materials, and it may have a positive impact on diversity outcomes. So when it comes to training focus, we found that identity-oriented versus knowledge-oriented, and similarities versus differences really impact on what they learned, what they get, because for example, in the training, when the training content focuses on the similarities apart from differences, the impact, we can see the positive impact on intended outcomes much more easily. But when it comes to differences, the participants, they are not feeling so comfortable to share the opinions about the differences, so it may lead to unintended outcomes. And the identity-oriented versus knowledge-oriented is the same. When it comes to identity, when something speaks to your identity, or if you feel threatened to your identity, it may have an unintended outcomes. But knowledge-oriented, it's not so risky. So if your training content is only a knowledge-oriented, you can expect that it can be a positive impact. When it comes to identity-oriented, we should be very careful about how we can include these identities into our trainings. Okay. So training methods. So when it comes to training methods, actually we have seen a couple of different trainings, like perspective taking and goal setting methods, or multi-instructional training. And what we have found that actually Improving the diversity knowledge and skills of employees may involve perspective taking and goal setting approach to generate more favorable diversity related attitudes and behavior compared to stereotype discrediting methods. So what I'm trying to say is that it is always a good idea to take the other minorities' perspective to utilize the training content, or it may be more applicable to everyone when it comes to taking the perspective of others. And also research suggests that multi-instructional diversity training programs are well accepted among the trainees compared to single instructional model. And furthermore, homogeneous training groups create a safe environment and trainees feels psychologically safe to adopt their behaviors. And what about the trainer characteristic? It's another important aspect of training context moderators. So trainees in certain trainer characteristics, including prior experience of the trainer, as well as their race and sex, were significant moderators of diversity training outcomes. Kulkarni et al. Emphasized that participants of disability diversity training preferred highly trained persons with experience related to disability issues trainers to enable learning through facilitated discoveries. For example, when we are talking about, so we are in the Black History Month, and when we are talking about Black history, the people want to see someone who is coming from the same background to speak with us. So the same is disability or the same, the similar thing, it's this race and sex as well. And what we have found is that, so we couldn't make any category, but we have found that if in the training there's an opportunity for social interaction, this training will make a difference. And if we see a training incorporate the tools to confront bias, it will have a positive impact to outcomes as well. Longer duration of training, definitely it's a good way of increasing the impact of intended outcomes. And homogeneous training group compositions can be another way to increase the impact of intended outcomes.
I'm just going to launch the next poll.
Okay.
So once again, everyone, we appreciate your participation in the polls. And this is, again, a question set up that you can choose kind of all that you feel might apply. So it is now open, and I'll just, again, let it run as people are able to answer. So I'll just let it run for maybe 10 more seconds as I see the numbers changing all the time. All right, I'm just going to end and share for the group, and I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. So actually, these are our organizational context moderators, but definitely I can understand why you picked to focus on long-term change because we are lacking the long-term change. And the second and third is diversity beliefs. And if you believe in diversity, yes, we can change the culture. And embedding diversity training into practice, yes, we have a lot of training. We are training the leaders, we are training the employees, but if we cannot take an action, only training, it's not enough. We need an affirmative actions. And I can see diverse top management and culture of inclusion. Yes, we want to see diverse top management so that they can be a role model for us to um, uh, enable diversity approach. And culture of inclusion, it's important as much as diverse top management also. Okay, let's go to the detail of organizational moderators. I'm clicking, but I need to click a couple more, I guess, a little bit. So anyway, so
we have moved to the next slide just to confirm. So we are seeing the results organizational context moderator slide, and just the point number 1 is what we're seeing currently.
Okay, great, thank you.
No problem.
So long-term focus. However, research on diversity training has not paid much attention to short and long-term consequences of training. Only a few studies demonstrated the impact of these interventions on behavioral change. For example, learning outcomes of diversity training, for example, awareness of one's implicit stereotypes, don't guarantee that employees apply these learning points into their daily life and eliminate diversity-related issues. Even if employees are paying attention to diversity-related issues in the organizations and they are aware of their biases, beliefs regarding diversity and inclusion, it is not easy for them to change their behavior. So it is the most difficult part is changing the behaviors in the long run. But at least we have the awareness piece, but we have to, these studies are showing us that we have to work on the, we have to think about more on working on long-term impact also. So when it comes to attitudinal supports, whether diversity training help improve attitudinal and behavior change toward minorities, it's ambiguous. Even though researchers observed some degree of change in attitudes and limited degree of behavior change, they suggested that one-off diversity training could not be a remedy for all diversity issues in workplace. So, for example, if we want to improve our attitudes on women versus racial minorities, for sure we need to take different actions on that to change our attitudes. Let me look at the culture of inclusion. So workplaces with inclusive cultures are perceived as fair and responsive among employees. Sensitization training helps organizational members understand each other's expectations, needs, and working styles. So in these two examples, the authors use disability sensitization workshop, but any type of sensitization workshop could work to increase culture of inclusion in the company. The other point is lack of empowerment. So empowerment is another factor that makes or breaks diversity training. Mayer and colleagues' qualitative study demonstrated that some community aged care workers express a sense of disempowerment to take decisions and initiate changes within the organizations through a lack of role constraints and opportunity. So we need definitely empower people to make changes, and we need to give them some support to change their behaviors and to become ally to other minority groups as well. And when we look at diverse top management, we see that the presence of a diverse top management team or not can alter the result of diversity training. This study integrated diversity management with strategic human resource management literature The authors reported that a gender-diverse top management team increases the performance outcome of a firm, like net profit, return on assets, corporate social responsibility, through diversity management system. According to authors, the top management team's gender diversity indicates the importance of creating an inclusive culture through various diversity interventions, including diversity training. The presence of women in top management team can ensure the success of diversity training by making a significant investment in diversity management. So if we are saying that we need to increase female numbers in our trainings, the trainees want to see the increase, or at least they want to see the action that you take. Otherwise, it will create an unintended outcomes. Even we aim to change these behaviors, we couldn't see the differences. Another topic is embedding diversity training into practice. You voted very high on that too. So consistently diversity training alone is not adequate if the formal mitigation procedures are absent. In a qualitative study, Foley and Williamson reported that raising awareness against implicit biases through training is not advantageous without implementing policies to address the biases. So without any attempt to changing anything, we need to address that, or we need to accept that there's a bias in this workplace, or there's a bias in us. There's a bias in everyone. So we need to accept this first, and then we need to take an action to change it. And the final part is diversity beliefs. So Holman and colleagues study demonstrated teams consisting of employees with more positive diversity beliefs are better in dealing with differences than teams consisting of employees with less positive diversity beliefs. Therefore, positive diversity beliefs can be listed as a moderator that impact diversity outcomes, and hence in turn it impacts the organizational performance. So to be mindful of the time, I may go quickly. We have like a couple of slides more. So when we look at the implication, there are two issues are critical to furthering theory and research on diversity training outcomes. The one is training design, the other one is organizational design. When we look at the training design, actually, our intention can be to change the attitude and behavior in the design and delivery process. So we need to make sure that our design and delivery of our training can aim to change the behaviors and attitudes. The other important pillar is empathy, perspective taking, and goal setting generates are more favorable than stereotype discreting. Yes, if we try to create positive environment by creating empathic, by allowing to build the empathy in the trainings, or if we can take a perspective of others in the training, this would help us increase intended outcomes other than suppressing our stereotypes. So what I'm saying is that instead of trying to decrease stereotypes, trying to increase others, trying to increase taking perspective of others. And in the trainings, we should definitely focus on similarities rather than differences. When we look at the organizational design, as you also voted that we need to focus on long-term DEI issues, and we need to come up with a plan in long term. And also organizations' attitudinal support of employees for attitude and behavior change. So we specifically aim to change the attitude and behavior, and we need the support from our organizations, means top management. We need to create a sense of inclusion and sensitization to diversity in our trainings. And we are trying to increase, we can try to increase employees' diversity beliefs, because if we have more positive diversity beliefs, we know that we have more positive outcomes. And we need to embed diversity training into practice. Not only training, we should also apply it. We should also practice it. So there are a couple of limitations in our research. So we exclude the gray literature. What this means, so we only focus on the published journals and published book chapters. We exclude PhD, master thesis or PhD thesis, or any unpublished works. And we look at only peer-reviewed journal article published in English, no other language other than English. And we only limit our focus on organizational context. Maybe we have something else in the educational context, but we only focus in organizational context. And we only include certain databases, so this may cause some limitations in our research as well. So when it comes to future research directions, so design-related interventions. So first, there is a limited understanding of why diversity training leads to unintended outcomes. Half of the studies in the literature are either review or conceptual papers. Empirical studies are needed to examine the relationship between diversity training intervention and outcomes. Second, in our conceptual model, we propose a list of factors influencing the outcomes, like training context or organization context. Future research could examine effectiveness of these boundary conditions to understand when diversity training may result in unintended outcomes. And the other pillar is, obviously, it's a long-term impact. Another potential research area is the focus on the long-term impact, and we want to increase the awareness of one's implicit bias and stereotype. If we aware our own stereotypes, it doesn't mean that we are internalizing it and we are changing it. So we need to spend more time on changing these behaviors. So we need to solely focusing on implicit bias training doesn't lead to intended long-term outcomes. We need to focus any other type of trainings as well, like increasing diversity belief, increasing inclusivity. And also we need to integrate intergroup diversity training intervention dialogue into classic diversity training. For example, if we need to facilitate understanding and empathy across the differences. For example, we cannot aim to change behaviors of majority people also. Minority people can have biases as well. So if we aim to change both attitudes and both behaviors, it can be more inclusive and it could be more acceptable for both majorities and minorities. So then we may create a space for all to change our behaviors. And what organizations need to educate employees on organizational DEI policies and practices. And we need to hold management team accountable, of course, for the progress. And we need to open to possible defensive reactions. And we are facing it every day. And we need to make long-term commitment to DEI efforts because this is an ongoing journey. And the other piece is the inclusive culture. So inclusive training interventions. So evidence suggests that diversity training focusing on perspective taking and maintaining internal motivation for diversity help reduce the use of stereotypes and improve attitudes towards minorities. We need to So moreover, the research focusing on the benefits of similarities highlighted that inclusive work climate help employees reduce their interpersonal bias, as I explained before. If we try to include everyone, it is easier to change everything. So we need to focus on similarities and inclusive rather than differences. And the other piece is, so what is that? Just like, the other piece is design novel bias prejudice reduction training intervention. Maybe we can integrate perspective taking and internal motivation to our training content so that maybe we can, it would be helpful to reduce our prejudice. And when we look at the culturally competent interventions, as we said, we need to promote similarities rather than differences, and we need to include majorities, culture, and perspectives as well, because as we are speaking always in minorities perspective in these trainings, majority people can get offended. So that's why we need to include them. We need to take their perspective. We need to get support from them to make everyone feel united. And the last piece is organizations need to frame internal motivations for all employees and make them accountable, committed to DEI efforts. So before taking the questions, I guess we have a poll, right, Elizabeth?
We do, but just because of time, we actually have a little less
Okay.
than 10 minutes. So I think if you're okay, I'll just open
Yeah.
the floor to the question and answer. And I do see that Aisha was able to join us. So if you're willing, Aisha, you're more than welcome to come on to camera and off of mute at this time. And we'll have a great discussion throughout these last minutes together around for the audience question and answer. And for the audience, just a reminder, you have both the chat function as well as the Q&A function open to you to put in any questions that you have. But I will kick things off with the first question we received, and please mind my head as I'm moving between screens, just to point that out. So when it comes to the effectiveness of diversity training, so we talked a lot about how there are unintended outcomes. So are there best practices that you can share or tips that you can share on how an organization can account for those? So when they're looking at evaluating their training, we've all seen, the evaluation surveys that will come out from this webinar as well. And usually it's looking for, questions around what did you learn? How will this affect your behaviors, whatever. But how can you look to include those unintended outcomes in your evaluation planning?
So for example, what we have seen in the practice, so when we accept that, I mean, when we verbalize, if we can accept that there can be unintended outcomes during the training, which is okay, and if we can accept that we have all biases, to include everyone's to say everyone is equal and everyone is united, maybe we can decrease these unintended outcomes. So we need to be very open, and we need to we need to accept that there can be some offensive or defensive arguments during the training, and we need to be present as a trainer. We need to be present these type of commands, and we need to facilitate by making sure that everyone feel included. In that case, we may be overcoming these unintended outcomes.
Anything you would like to add, Aisha, or should we move to the next question?
Yeah, Thank you. Maybe I can add one more thing that is like, emphasizing, since we are talking about best practices. So one idea here is that, focusing or emphasizing more on the similarities rather than talking about the differences, that how a minority is different compared to the majority. That creates more division here. So instead of talking of that, if we can talk a lot about on the similarities, and if we have, that empathetic, perspective here, that creates, more inclusion. And another thing is very important, that is, building a culture of inclusion, that we believe that, this implementation of DEI is not an easy task if you ignore the total organization. It's not only about HR, it's not only about a specific, department or division, right? So whatever, it doesn't matter, like, even if we provide like, hundreds of training programs, or like we spend thousands of hours on diversity training, it will not work unless we all can actually get included into the process, from everyone in the organization, from the top level management to the bottom line. So that's really crucial here. And everyone needs to understand the objective or the purpose of DEI. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, and that kind of builds into a next question around that organizational culture of inclusion, as we have spoken about throughout, and the importance of seeing the action that goes along with the training. So, were there things that you can recommend that helps to create those, positive intended outcomes when it comes to that? You've gone to the training, now it's post. What are people really looking for from the organization throughout the levels to see the change in action? What were people looking for to feel that the diversity training had an impact?
Mhm. So when it comes to inclusion, so for example, you want to increase the female number in your organization, but when you say this directly to the people, the male employees can get offended, because why we are trying to increase the female numbers. So rather than doing that, we need to use the inclusive language. So we cannot state, we cannot state male or female, but we just show the numbers, which are obvious, and we may ask for from managers to their support to increase these numbers, but regardless of their genders. So we need to use inclusive language, first of all, in my opinion.
Anything to add there? I just want to provide the opportunity, Aisha, if there's anything you'd like to add.
I would here probably like to add one more point, is that, integrating the whole process with the change management system in the organization, because this is about accepting something new, right? So if the organization and the members are not familiar with the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, then, at first you need to ensure that everyone adopts it. And to do that, what we need to do is that we'll have to have a lens, or, like adopting the lens of change, and then, applying all the practices and policies that we actually use in change management in the organization. That would really help here to eventually whatever we try to establish through the DEI initiatives.
I think that's a really great point to, again, get it from just the outside, maybe that 3 hours of training, and really embed it throughout all of the different kind of points of contact within the organization, and really looking at it as a change management process. I think that's a great point to bring up. I am looking at the time, so I'll just end with a last question here. So you did talk about the kind of the trainee context and the readiness there. So just wanting to maybe talk about, even before we get to the actual training, what can organizations do to get that pulse of what is the readiness, the openness to taking on this change, or perhaps looking at their own biases, their own beliefs, because I imagine that would be, something that would be helpful in terms of knowing where are people at today to then bring that forward into training design and impact and such.
Mhm. Yeah, that is absolutely true. The one thing is to see where we are and to see how we can change. And the other thing is that I know I'm saying I keep continue to say the same thing, but we need to acknowledge that we are all biases, and we need to have a motivation to change our attitudes or behaviors. uh, if we don't have this motivation, we don't do it anything. So first thing, yes, we need to aware of our behaviors and attitudes, and the second question is we want to change it. So there is a motivation piece as well.
Okay, fantastic. And knowing that we are at time, again, I'll pass the floor to Aisha in case there's anything you'd like to add, or we'll close the discussion here. Go ahead.
Yeah, just maybe that we can have a quick survey before we go for implementing the diversity training to the employees. So I'm just connecting with the point of Gular that since this is important, that we need to identify our own prejudice, our own stereotypes, right? So if we can have a short survey just before the diversity training, and the employees will be able to identify that what are their prejudice, or like, in which area they are specifically biased. So when they know about that, they can actually work on that. But when I don't know that in which area I'm specifically prejudiced, or like I'm stereotyped, because usually I will think that, no, I'm a very fair person, because that's our own perception, right? But we are not fair, unfortunately. So that's the very first thing. And yes, survey, maybe, yeah, one quick thing that we can just include here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know it's obviously a very complex topic, as you have shown, and it takes a lot of openness to come into these types of trainings and hopefully gain great impact from them. But I think conversations like today and having the wonderful audience here participating shows great strides towards creating very impactful diversity training and positive change in our organizations of today. So we are at time. So I do want to thank you all so much for attending our audience. It's wonderful that you choose to take your time with us. And thank you to Guler for obviously leading us through this presentation and bringing forward such great research and understanding. And Aisha, thank you so much for your time as well, for hopping in and creating a great discussion today at the end of the presentation. So thank you to both of you for your time and expertise and your continued research in this field. Our Work Wellness Institute members, your certificate of attendance will be sent automatically. We also hope that we will see everyone in our future programming. So please do look at our website again. That's workwellnessinstitute.org, and you can click into our courses or our resources sections to look at all of the wonderful learning mobilization that we have available to you, as well as our upcoming schedule.
Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we're transforming research into workplace performance and health at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.